Hello everyone, good evening in Vancouver and good morning in Hong Kong. Welcome everybody to PASM Photography 104 class. Today's class is about what we call the exposure compensation. What is exposure compensation? I think a lot of people will have a question about what is exposure compensation in our camera. How I should put it this way, it doesn't seem it's necessary to do it now, but sometimes we say it might be really helpful for us to understand how it works. And also, before we explain to you guys about what we call the exposure compensation, we will need to know more about what we call the auto exposure. Okay, my name is Eddie and welcome everybody to PASM class. Okay, let's get started. This is photography class 104. 2 weeks ago we have another one. It's called autofocus photography class 103. So feel free to check out my YouTube video. One of them is about the auto focus topic, I should say. Very sorry, today is a little bit slow for me. Anyway, so basically nowadays camera is really smart. We want it to help us to do most of the work. We want it to focus for us and also to take a good photos, like enough light, properly lighted photo for our presentation. Okay. Okay, my computer is a little bit slow. Okay, so PASM is a meetup group for originated from Hong Kong, and now we have another meetup group in Vancouver. Due to COVID-19 situation, we don't have any actual meetup in Vancouver now. I'm very happy that in Hong Kong, PASM group has actually one actual in-person meetup, and I think Mark held it like 2 weeks ago, around I think beginning of April. Sorry, I forgot the exact date, but everybody has a very good time enjoying taking photo walk-up. So please keep checking our website, meetup.com, and with the PASM Hong Kong photography, and then we will have the new update for the event, and hopefully we can in the future to do more. Okay, so before we talk anything, we explain a little bit what is exposure compensation. And this topic, we actually exposure compensation will be covered in both DSLR, modern mirrorless camera, and even phone. Actually, our modern iPhone or Android phone, they also have exposure compensation. So, but we will not cover how we change the exposure compensation in phone cameras. We will just talk about how to do it in a regular camera, or I should say the mirrorless camera or DSLR. So as I explained before, we explain about the exposure compensation, we have to talk about what is octo exposure. It might be a little bit surprise to some of the newcomer for photography. Okay, it might. Okay, let me get back to the history a little bit. Okay, it's a little bit slow. Before we explain about the octo exposure, we have to talk about a little bit about the history. And this kind of octo exposure has a very long history. It might be longer than most of us expected. The first camera is made by Kodak. It has a mechanical octo exposure mechanism inside. It's called Super 620. It's in 1938. So back then, they don't have actual, how should I say, like electronic control circuit for that purpose. So most of the thing is done by gears, or like actual spring and gears to do it. What you can do is when you press the button, it's kind of similar to what we have nowadays. When you press the shutter button, half pressing it, it will sense the light, how much light is going through to the camera, and then it will lock the proper aperture and shutter speed. Because before we have this kind of octo exposure, everybody need to work out on the formula how to get the proper exposure. But with that concept arriving or invented, people start to have ideas to do it automatically. So, but unfortunately, this camera wasn't a very good successful camera because it's really unreliable. It uses a cerium light meter as its main light sensor. Okay, Now we talk about modern camera. Modern camera using kind of similar ideas. Oh. What happened to my slide today? Okay, I'm very sorry, my slide is not really working very well, so I guess I will force it into each slide so it will not obstruct too much of our time. Okay, so I have to excuse a little bit about this presentation because it's just anyway. On our right hand side, we explain about the modern camera use of different technology for doing light metering. We have two kinds of major cameras, DSLR or the mirrorless one. DSLR have a separate sensor to do the light metering, and then the mirrorless one actually using the image sensor itself to measure the light to go to the sensor. So each of them has their own pros and cons. In autofocus class, we explained that because DSLR has a separate sensor, so sometimes the autofocus will not be very accurate because the sensor is not aligned perfectly. Sometimes it may have a little bit misalignment. And also for the mirrorless one, because they are actually on the same sensor, the image sensor and the the autofocus is just the same. So that one is really accurate for autofocusing. But on auto exposure is the other side of the story. The light meter for the DSLR is actually more capable. It is really fast, and because this technology has been around for very long time. But for our mirrorless world, it do all the measurement with the actual image sensor, and our image sensor readout speed, or what we call the information transfer to the CPU of a camera, it's not really fast, so it has some slight delay. And especially when we have some extremely dynamic situation, when you're pointing a camera from a very dark side and then you point to some windows, you see it doesn't change really quickly. One of the examples is when you use your mobile phone, when you're pointing at the dark object and point to the windows, I think you will observe about half a second to 1 second delay of the whole proper exposure adjustment. So this is the thing that we have to take in mind, that mirrorless is not like how to say, it's not like invincible. It has its drawback. So for auto exposure, this is one of the drawback. So the cons, okay. Anyway, the most important part, as I explained here, is like we have to know the metering, how we do the metering, and how to suit our need, and how to make this to the best of our situation. Okay. So I think I include a chart for most of the brand, but not all the brand. So more like the famous brand here. Okay. In here you can see at the bottom it's like a metering mode and icon by manufacturer. So Canon, Fuji, Nikon, Olympus, Panasonic, Pentax, and Sony. So basically every of them, they have some different icon for similar meaning. Their ways to present the actual ideas might be a little bit different, but the function is very similar, so we will explain it. Basically, I will use Canon as an example because Canon actually have 4 kinds, but it's more like a fine-tune of the other 2. I will explain to you guys. So for the others, it will be very similar, maybe a little bit different from Canon, but it won't be really significant from each other. So basically, this is the best, I should say the simplest one. It's called evaluating metering. Some brand might call matrix, multi-segment. You can see digital ESP with matrix, Sony is called multi-segment, Pentax multi-segment, and Fuji is Song multiple. What it means is you will evaluate everywhere on the, I should use the Olympics picture here, it's more clear. So it divide about like 5 zones together. The center part is we want to place the subject on the in the center part, and then the remaining will be the 4 parts. This is useful and could be used for even backlit subjects. For example, if my window is completely open, it might be too bright, but it will still measure the subject itself to use this as the reference for the exposure. However, this is more like they use all the data together to calculate the proper exposure. Due to the problem that our sensor cannot really see all the dynamic range as our human eyes. So the thing is, you might run into some situation, the main subject is properly lit, but the background may be completely blown out. So this will be quite obvious for this in this kind of situation. However, I should say this is more like the most common way to take photos. If you want to start, this is a very good start to set the camera in this mode. Okay. So the second one is called center weighted average. Center weighted average is using the center as the main. So instead of using all the other zones as a helping out, but they will mainly calculate all the center value first and then try to de-weight it or not weighting the side or the other area as much as the center parts. So this is a thing that sometimes it might not really work when it has a backlit situation. So we have to take in mind. And this is called the PASM metering. It's only for Canon side. PASM metering is what we call the, they will cover up the center part. It's about 6% of the center part, the whole photo 6%. So this especially when you have some model which want to make sure face or his face is properly lit, and we can ignore the strong backlight at the back. So this is one of the idea. The reason why others have more is because they are doing just Canon separate. You tune the partial metering, and then they have another called spot metering. But for others, they just have spot metering for all of them. So basically, spot metering is really like 3% of the area. They will calculate the proper exposure value and try to ignore everything else. So this is really useful when you, of course, doing a portrait photography, and sometimes when you have a bird in the sky, then this could help you a little bit with the bird to allow the bird to have a proper exposure. So this is the idea. And please take a note that the camera will try to work its best to get the best exposure for that photo. It is not guaranteed to be perfect. It might not be shooting for what you need. It is just more like the factory default, what they think we might need. Okay, so this is why, as I say, before we explain to you what is exposure compensation, we have to explain to you all the exposure. Until this point, we discuss is all about the camera will do its best to do the exposure job. Okay, and as I explained in the before, like the autofocus class, camera cannot really understand what is the main subject. Maybe in the future, like the Canon new camera or a Sony new camera, they might understand, okay, this is a dog, that is a bird, and that is maybe some people there. So before that, they still might not be really understand. Sometimes they might not be able to track the face or the animal head as well. So we have to understand this is what the camera factory to do their best to give the proper exposure. And it goes the same to the mobile phone as well. even today, it doesn't really like very well understanding every photos or what is the subject. Even I should say today Google Lens, it can detect the object, but I think I fail maybe 30 to 40%. That program cannot explain to me what I'm looking at. Okay, anyway, back to our camera stuff. The light meter display here. Usually we can see the camera, something like that, and then we have a light meter here. It's very similar to the old time camera, even with the frame, they have a lighter this here. Okay, let me explain a bit of the lighter. Light meter display normally will not enable at all. In order to get that light meter to actually really display the light, the amount of light coming to the camera, we have to set it to minimum demo, and the ISO has to lock on certain number, certain values. So if I don't set the ISO to be fixed value, but set auto ISO, and even if I'm in manual mode, it will still be what we call the exposure compensation in like an indicator or like a display. Okay, so if we want to get back to the very traditional light metering display, we have that adding back to manual and also disable the auto ISO in order to. So see in this like 0 when we have a triangle on some indicator pointing 0 means the camera think you need to say very specific. Okay, it's the camera think that photo exposed properly. Okay, it means that is what you want. It's just oh, my camera just now. Sorry, my camera just now maybe some form of the body. Okay, I'm very sorry. I hope I didn't because things up. So explain again. The lighter is the 0 hertz. The display means the camera is having to think the exposure is proper by the camera default, and negative means it's bright. And we can only have this when this is absolutely at the manual with the ISO with not setting to auto ISO. Otherwise, it will be always be the exposure compensation display, not the light meter display. Okay, so it will have a pointer about center will be about 0. 0 means the camera thing the exposure is proper. Positive side means overexposure too bright. Negative side means it's underexposure. Means too dark. Okay. What happened? Okay, my was nice really slow today, and also I didn't change the camera timeout. That's why when the camera times out, even my 4th video will not be here. Okay, so again, exposure command effect, similar in Canon, Nikon, Sony, well, everything similar. When we set in PASM mode, usually this part of the light will change to what we call the exposure compensation setting display. Okay. Or when we set to the M and the ISO is set as auto, the light meter will also display the current inside the function as a light meter. That is, if we set to 0, we use the total exposure detection method to take the photos, and everything is on camera default. No camera unangle, thing we just on camera. And so some camera actually has some better metering, it will be better, some will be not as good, and it will also a little bit not so good. So that's why sometimes when you hear some people say, oh, when you certain model, you have to lower the exposure compensation a little bit or raise up a little bit, something like that. But honestly, I think it's more important after you check the photos after you take certain of them to make sure that it's what you want. So here is an example. When you have a photo that is not bright enough, then we change the exposure compensation to a positive side. When we change to 1, things we allow double of the amount of light. So the sample here will be from 0 to 1. Some people might think that 1 is more properly lit. 2 is maybe a little bit overblown. Anyway, we use this one as an example to explain to you. 1 will be more bright, and then here will be the will be means we have 4 times more light, and it will be very bright in like one on the right hand side. Then for the dark one, when our photos might want to lower the compensation to one stop, or maybe by negative means from 0 to 1, so this photo is dark. They illustrate this one so you can understand how much darkness it will give you the idea. And also each time we say each stop is by a factor of 2. One is like is times 2 in the positive side, and -1 it means times half of it. And if we say minus, it means 1/4 of black here. And using the exposure compensation, you can see actually the 2 in between for each image. So come out just 1/3 of instead of like 4. We need about 2 hours to provide more smooth and more control. So actually in our photos, you don't every time say stop, so and adjust the dial, and it should allow you to point to one here, here, every time just 1/3. Some can allow you to, instead of taking 1/3, you set to half stop. Personally, I prefer to be 1/3 of the stop. You get better result and allow you to have a better control. Okay, so when using the exposure compensation one, we have to understand you use the camera exposure triangle to view that. What it is like, we set to P mode. The camera will try to adjust all 3 of them: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And then when we say we want to use the aperture power mode, we will adjust the shutter speed only because we lock the aperture. So this is when we're taking some portrait, we focus out the shutter speed. So we will not be just too above the aperture. So we keep the same depth of field every time. And then usually, as I explained before, I usually set ISO to allow it to fall a little bit. To also ISO will be out. So the camera will not adjust the shutter speed so much. You will try to keep reasonable adjustment for the shutter speed and adjust the ISO. Because ISO you can set in the range maybe from 100 to 1600. So you basically have about 5 stop, 4 to 5 stop of you can, and you still I should say pretty good shutter speed as well. And as the power mode, and we will adjust only the aperture. This is very ideal in some situation that we may not be able to allow shutter speed to vary, especially we want to use we want to capture with certain time of period. So then you change aperture to help us to do it, and also do it to show as well to compensate the priority. The M mode, as I explained in the previous slide, if we have the set as view as the so of course it will lock the aperture and shutter speed. So you're giving the same shutter speed and ISO. I mean shutter speed and the aperture. The look and everything should be very similar, but just the so this is also very ideal for and for even taking in M mode. And usually sometimes when we take in M mode, I will explain to people that this is actually quite good. We can reduce our workload a little because nowadays camera can really get a very good measurement of the exposure for the exposure. So that's it, and thank you. I conclude the class out here. And if you have any question about the exposure compensation, feel free to leave me any message in this YouTube channel or in this YouTube video, and I will get back to you ASAP. And also thank you for attending PASM class.